Hey everyone, in this video we're going to be reviewing the new 2021 G80 BMW M3. Now, the car's coming out very soon. We've seen some examples of this, and obviously the biggest drama with this car is how it looks with those big, gigantic front grills, which are kind of straying away from how BMWs have looked recently. A lot of people don't like them. The purpose of this video will be to find out if the car overall stacks up with all its specs versus how it looks, and if it's still a car that I would recommend buying. So let's get straight into it. This is how we're going to be reviewing the BMW M3, and as I post more videos I'm going to review them in the same format. We're going to assign a score to each car in each of these categories, which gets us to a score out of 100. And all of the cars I review are going to come into this format. We're going to figure out what's the best car overall. So let's start off with looks first of all. So this is the official footage that BMW has given us for their BMW M3, and as you can see in this, the most obvious thing about it is these huge front grills that they've got at the front, which compared to the older BMW models is a huge change, and a lot of people really don't like this, including myself. When I first saw this car, I thought it was quite an ugly look. But now the more I look at this car, I think the more it's growing on me. I'm starting to like the look a bit more. And I think other people were probably in the same shoes based on what I'm reading in forums. People are saying, oh, it looks better in real life, or the more I look at it, the better it's looking. And I think that's just how BMW's design works, is each iteration, each model, they change. They make quite a dynamic and aggressive change, and people don't like it at first. And they go into liking it over time, and that was the same with the last series of M3s as well. I think it's just in the nature of BMW's design language. I think at a year or two's time everyone will be looking at these and going, wow, they look so good, because they'll be getting used to that look. Now this is perfectly visible in this other video I've got here, which is a video that I found on the internet, which someone's actually seen this example model in a BMW dealer. The car's in this awesome spec where it's this dark frozen grey colour. It looks like I've got blacked out wheels and other things. Just have a look at this. You can see the curves really well on this vehicle, and I actually think it looks really good. I think I hated this at the beginning, but just have a look at all this. The hood vents on top. Let me just freeze it here. It looks really aggressive. It looks really wide. They've got these BMW style grills in a slightly different design that they've done historically. Huge grill at the front obviously, and they've got the number plate here, which gives it a slightly different look. I'm not sure I quite like this bit up here. It looks like a little bit like a pig snout, and I kind of like how on the previous ones, like the previous generation M4, they had that hood bucket, which kind of stood out, made it look more aggressive. I'm not sure I quite like these ones up here. But overall, it looks so much better in this spec. If I was going to get one of these, I would definitely get it in this spec. Love this version of the car. And you can see with the M3, unlike in the M4, it's got these very aggressive rear haunches and this line up the top up here, just connecting the lights to the next door handle over there. I think it looks really aggressive. I think the back actually looks a lot better than the previous model as well. With that rear diffuser at the back, kind of frames the car. Overall, I think the design's really growing on me, but whatever score we give it now, people are going to have a problem with it. But I think I'm going to give it an 8 now for looks, because I know in time when we look back at this video, we're going to go, yep, that was a great looking car. Now in terms of interior, look, in the previous generation, or the most current generation of Mercedes, like the A-Class, etc., the way their cars look currently, their interiors are so much better than BMW's, especially if you look at the most recent M series. They've still got the old analog clutch, they've still got the old analog handbrake and things like that. Is really starting to look a bit out of date. But you can see that BMW have rolled out the new interior dash, which does look good. You've got the digital display in front of the wheel. You've got the digital middle console, which is fairly similar to what they had in the last one. And they've cleaned up that middle console down here with the red start-stop button and things like that, which I think in the old M cars were starting to look quite dated. But I'm not sure that this is going to be good enough to be on the same level as the new Mercedes, which is just out of this world. So the new BMW interiors are good, but they're not best in class. You can see there's a lot of carbon fiber everywhere. They've got the bucket seats, which are really good in the M cars, and you've got these M logos which light up as well. You can see the new seats are looking even more aggressive with all the rear-ended carbon fiber as well. Not quite sure I like the look of that for the interior. Overall, I'm going to give the interior an okay score, but not an amazing score. They do have those interior lighting like they do in the Mercedes, but the Mercedes do it so much better. And they've got these little sills inside the door, along with the M3 competition on the side, which are obviously fake vents. So we're going to give this probably a 7 for interior. I mean, it's good, but not fantastic. Now let's move on to acceleration. Now this is probably where the BMW is actually going to do quite well. In terms of specs on this car, the new M series, the engine is always the strongest point of the car. And the new M3, M4 is no different. They've actually got the new version of the standard 3-litre inline 6 that M3s have always had. And this one's codenamed the S58. And this has actually debuted before. It's already been in the X3M and the X4M, and it currently produces 375 kilowatts and 650 newton meters of torque. So that actually, according to official statistics for BMW, that makes it good for a straight line sprint of 3.9 seconds. Now on paper, and that's as a rear driver by the way, now on paper that might not seem like a huge improvement, but if you consider what BMW does is they report one thing to the public and then they do another thing in terms of actual results. So in reality, in terms of what we could expect for this car, I'm thinking probably low 3s, maybe even a 2 if you had the right conditions, considering it's an all-wheel drive car. BMW tend to overstate its position, and it's going to be an improvement. It's a guaranteed improvement on last year. They always improve. So from the last generation, I think we were talking about a 4.20 to 100 kilometer sprint time, and in this generation we're talking about a 3.9 seconds. So that's a 0.3 official saving. So, but if you consider people were doing, low 3s in reality in the last M series, and this is on a rear-wheel drive car, you throw into the new all-wheel drive system plus the improvement, I reckon you could probably get low 3s, maybe even a 2 in front of it in the right conditions. Now, in terms of fuel consumption, we're talking about 10.2 litres, which is an improvement from last time, which was 10.8. But again, this is BMW numbers, and they've probably taken into account this really annoying start-stop engine system. Now, in terms of the speed limit, both models are electronically limited to 250 kilometers, but you can pay for an extra package and get up to 290 kilometers. So in terms of how we're going to actually rank this score, the BMW M3 is always going to be best in class for this, and this generation is no different. So these statistics are going to be crazy, especially when people start getting their hands on these cars and actually getting some real track times. And I think the all-wheel drive system is going to be awesome as well. So in terms of score, we're going to give this a 10 out of 10 for acceleration, just because I'm anticipating the results for this car are going to be outstanding. But we might just give it a 9 for acceleration and maybe a 9 for power as well, just because it's not quite at that supercar level either, because you're not really paying for it. You're only paying, I think the RRP in Australia is $150,000, maybe in the US might be around just under $100,000. Now, in terms of practicality, this is probably a good thing, and the fact that BMW gives the choice between the 2-door 4 Series and the 3-door M3, and the fact that we're only reviewing the M3 in this video, I'm going to give this a fairly good score for practicality, because it does have 4 doors, and it still does look really good. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. And you combine that with a fairly large boot space, which has always been the case for M3s, M4s, surprisingly large boot space considering the size of the car and all the space inside the car as well. Generally, this is quite a practical car. The next score is the cool factor of the car. Now, driving something new like the M3, where people aren't seeing a lot of these on the road, you're inherently going to get a lot of head turnings on the car. Now, as more people get this car over time, it's probably going to blend in a bit more, especially the fact that it's a sedan. It doesn't have that same sporty stylings as some of the other supercars, even in this price range. it's probably going to blend in a little bit more. So initially it's probably going to have quite a high cool factor, maybe later on maybe not as high, but I think anyway you're going to drive this with this loud exhaust and the aggressive stylings, especially at the front end with this new design, I think you're going to get a lot of attention. So I'm inclined to give this a fairly high score, but I am conscious that some people might disagree just because they don't like the styling. In fact, what I might do is I might give it a higher cool factor score and a lower looks score, just because some people might not agree that it looks good, but no one can deny that it gathers a lot of attention, and you know, all publicity is good publicity, right? Next one is quality. Now, I have been noticing in a lot of cars these days versus BMW versus Mercedes is that the Mercedes build quality is actually doesn't seem to be as good as BMW's these days. And what you'll see with BMWs is you press around the cabin and you won't get any rattles. Well, you do the same for a Mercedes, and you will start to get these squeaks and rattles. And you know, even with the last generation of Mercedes C63, 63, they had all these issues with the tires breaking down. You know, they hit a pothole and they'd have to get brand new tires every single time. You're not going to get that same issue with BMW. At least you haven't gotten it with the last generation of M3s and M2s. So I'm inclined to think it's the same story for this new generation M3. So I'm going to give this a higher quality rating of 8. Now, in terms of value, BMW have actually put up the price this year for the M3 versus last year, and it is getting quite expensive in terms of what it looks like, and people seeing a sedan going down the street versus $150,000 Australian dollars. So I'm inclined to not give it as high as the score, maybe a 7, even a 6 potentially. But you are getting, for a supercar with almost sub 3 second acceleration, awesome engine, it's fairly good value. But the M3s are definitely more expensive than, say, the M2, for example. So I'm going to give it a 6. Now, in terms of daily driver, now the last generation, I'm inclined to give this a low score just because the handling was very rough, the exhaust was very loud, and the fuel economy wasn't great in traffic. And especially with the last dual clutch transmission, when you were driving in traffic, it was super jerky. It wasn't a great daily driver. Now, these problems seem to be fixed with the most recent upgrade here, where they're in the M3 competition. You're required to have the 8-speed torque converter transmission, which they've actually, BMW's moved away from the dual clutch, I think partially because of that jerky clutch issue. And also in terms of the suspension as well. So the suspension in the last generation was quite rough, not great for traffic. This one you can actually see here in the last screenshot that they've actually got an adaptable suspension, so you can set it for a soft ride or a hard ride. That actually does fix some of that problem. So aside from the bad fuel efficiency, it's actually probably going to be a decent daily driver. So I'm going to give this a 7. Now finally, for the X Factor. The X Factor is basically, it's something that doesn't fit into all of these categories, but it's something important that when you consider everything together, what does this car mean to you? Now the M generation, the M branding means a lot to a lot of people. And it's always going to carry a bit of an X factor with this car, and especially with all the drama in terms of the new styling and the new looks and whether people like it or not and people coming around, combined with all the features of the car, the excellent engine. I'm going to give this a 7 for an X factor. So that brings us to a total score for the 10 categories of 76 out of 100, so 76%. So it's a pretty good score. So overall, would I buy this car? I think the answer is yes. Yes, I would. Aside from the price constraints, it's quite an expensive car. It's got everything going for it. It's got, maybe you don't like the looks, but it's got good looks. It's got an amazing engine. It's got practicality. It's a daily driver you can take everywhere. And it's got a lot of legacy behind that brand name. So yes, I would buy this car.